Honestly, okay, this discussion is 100 times more important than whether we should have red flag laws and ban assault rifles.
Can I just say, I think the fact that we're empowering people with the right to start a civil war if they don't agree with things is kind of scary.
That's honestly what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, like,
that's the legally scary. I think it's scary that people have no ability to defend themselves against a power that is subjugating them.
Welcome to the flip side. This is pre-Socrates,
Carson,
and Hussein,
and Julian.
In this episode, we'll be engaging the discussion of gun control and Second Amendment rights in America.
We want to acknowledge the mass shooting that happened in Maine on October 25th, especially with everything going on. We felt it was a really relevant conversation, and we wanted to tackle it as our first episode.
Okay.
And as we've seen, everyone's very familiar by now with the arguments that are immediately launched, and I'm sure everyone's very frustrated because it seems like this happens every couple months in America. There's 393 million privately owned firearms in the United States. That's more guns than people. And in 2021, almost 21,000 people died from gun-related injuries. So it's obviously always a very relevant topic, especially in the United States. And in the wake of this mass shooting, we want to kind of make a genuine effort to explore all sides of this issue. And also, one further disclaimer before we get into it, one of our goals of this podcast is to be casual and have a lighthearted tone with it, but obviously that gets a little difficult when talking about such serious topics as these, so we just want to go ahead and acknowledge that we're not trying to make light of any of the tragedies, and we know many people have been affected or know people that have been affected by gun violence, so we definitely want to be respectful of that.
Yeah.
But still have a good time debating and hashing out these issues and having a quality conversation.
Sources and further reading will be listed in the description of our YouTube video.
So one of the main things with gun control is the Second Amendment and the debates around the interpretations of what the Second Amendment actually means and the importance of it through time. So we're going to be going around and talking about the interpretations of the Second Amendment and how we interpret it. So anybody want to give the definition of the Second Amendment, or like
Wait,
the
we should
specific...
read it out first. We should read it out.
Yeah.
Are you reading it out?
You don't have it memorized? As an
How about
American?
this? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms should not be infringed.
Okay.
So it pretty much gives people the right to bear arms, to group and attack the government.
Well, no,
I don't know about that.
Yeah, but it's saying well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. This was written during a time period where there was not a strong central government power. I mean, we won our independence through the usage of militias and mercenary armies from Europe. So it wasn't like we had a standardized federal army. I mean, in my opinion, the first thing I read this, when I see it, it's just very outdated. I mean, this was written over 200 years ago, completely different time period. Just a little inapplicable, in my opinion, to
today. The way we kind of group our voices, or to, I guess, group together is through voices rather than use like militia guns, or guns like that. So I feel like that part of it's kind of outdated.
Well, we also have a professional army nowadays as well.
Yeah,
so.
And guns compared to whatever the U.S. Army has is probably like
Way
very
different.
little.
Well, I think it's important to say that the army isn't allowed to carry their guns in public. I mean, that just goes to show that.
Really?
I mean, it's like their assault rifles. It's like...
Oh, shoot. Yeah. That would be pretty scary. Yeah.
That would be kind of scary.
Okay, let's not get off too far into the weeds here.
I don't think
How about, all right, let's do another reading of this. A well-regulated militia, comma, be necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. So the debate here, I mean, this is semantics, and we can spend some time arguing about whether it matters at all what this old document says. But if we are assuming that this has value and we want to try to uphold what is written here in the Second Amendment, there's definitely a big debate about the clause there, a well-regulated militia. So that's very interesting that they put that in there. It seems like they are kind of specifically mentioning that, but also there's the argument that the first clause is just a prefatory clause, a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, and then comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So it seems like the first clause is just clarifying the reason why it's necessary to the security of a free state. And then there's an operative clause right after saying the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So it's not necessarily saying because in order to keep a well-regulated militia, people need to have, it's just one of the reasons why. So.
Okay, so now we have that. What does that mean then?
Well, I still think it definitely still means that the militia needs to keep arms in order to secure the safety of the state, right? Is what you're saying? Are you arguing that the placement of those commas kind of detaches guns from the militia?
Yeah, it detaches the main part of the clause, the main part of the statement, which is that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's the main cause. And then the first part there is saying one of the reasons why is because a well-regulated militia is important for the security of a free state. So yeah, we can talk a little bit about militias. So they're in contrast to like a professional army. It's an army made up of the civilians. So one of the reasons why we might want a well-regulated militia, which is made up of not professional soldiers but civilians, is to fight back against a tyrannical government. And we know that in the founding of the United States history, that's how we defended ourselves against tyranny or had our own insurrection against tyranny. So it makes sense that the founding fathers would want to make sure that future generations were able to do that as well. And then there's also...
But do you think that we still have the opportunity to do that? Like, do we need to do that?
I think the closest thing that we can kind of see, like in terms of a armed insurrection against the government, January 20th is probably the closest thing we're going to get to that in modern history. And it wasn't... people weren't necessarily shooting at the law enforcement officers, but it doesn't change the fact that a lot of the people there brought guns, and that was viewed pretty negatively. So I think it really depends on who has the right to insurrect against the government. I think it's also important to clarify that after this document was written, a lot of the founding fathers actually changed their perception of rebellions. They were very critical about it. Well, some of them were very critical about it after the Constitution was written. Right. So I don't think that... given that this was written at a time where they were still trying to fight for their independence, a lot of these ideas don't hold to the functioning of the modern state.
Yeah, I guess that's what a lot of people these days are saying. Like, do we need to change it up? Is it too old? Does it still hold up right now?
Yeah, and that just goes beyond the Second Amendment to the Constitution in general. If there's a lot of it that...
Well, I think that's getting into another...
It is, yeah. But I'm just saying, like, this is grounded in a larger issue is all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes into if we need to change the entire Constitution, which we're kind of not talking about. But I think there's also some value in how we interpret it in today's day, and we've adapted, I feel, to it well. Okay. And that we're not using it to go against a tyrannical government because we haven't been really faced with that on a certain extent, but we're using it to... Now it's a tool to kind of protect ourselves, and I guess that's kind of really the only way you can use a gun is to protect yourself, and that's the only way I believe you should use a gun, right, or use any sort of weapon like that, is to protect yourself and not attack. Mm-hmm. So that's how kind of I feel like, at least, self-defense. I feel like self-defense. Right. I feel like general society use it as that, but obviously, whenever you give a person that much power in his hand, and if it's not, like, as the Constitution says, regulated militia, I feel like is the most important part of that sentence. If it's not regulated, then you can have a lot of incidents like the Maine shooting, the there's a lot. I have a lot on my list here.
Yeah.
We can go through later, but it's basically for me. There needs to be way more regulations on it because it's such a powerful tool that can cause so much damage, and to give it to ordinary citizens, because let's be real, ordinary citizens in America, we have 300 million people. Not everyone is mentally healthy. Not everyone has the right attitude towards how they treat other people, and that has to all be taken into consideration to regulate guns and regulate these incidents that are going to happen. These incidents will happen as long as there's guns in America.
Right.
But it's just a way of
Preventing it.
Yeah. There's certain countries.
So, yeah, we're going into a lot of different directions here. To kind of wrap up the Second Amendment interpretations, and we should also talk about. Y'all have mentioned that it seems very outdated. Why do we care at all about this document? Is something that's important to talk about. It seems, especially to people that don't live in America, Americans and especially right-wingers seem to have this kind of like fetish for the Constitution, and talk about why that is. And then as far as the militia stuff, that can just be like the most important reason that the founding fathers thought we should have the right to bear arms. But it doesn't have to be the only reason. Like, I'm sure they were also thinking about self-defense in there, even though it's not explicitly mentioned. Also, the militia doesn't necessarily have to be confined to people serving in the military. It could just be any able-bodied men who are capable of holding a gun could be considered part of the militia.
Well, that's what a militia is. Yeah, we were distinguishing it from the military, though, which is a professional army.
Yeah. But that's the thing, though. Should it be?
Okay, so let's talk about the Constitution's importance. What do y'all think? Should we care what it says?
Probably, but because for other issues, it's pretty decent.
Obviously, we have to have some sort of reference to have a structure on what our government is kind of wanting to be like, but we also have to adapt to times are very much different now with the technology that we have. So it's important to not really look at the Constitution too literally.
Yeah,
because I feel like we do that too much, and it's just we just got to adapt to it. I don't know how we're gonna do that, because the best way people want to adapt to things is have it written down. So I don't think there's a way we could change the entire Constitution.
Well, there's not. I mean, most of the powers of our government comes from the implicit, not explicit things in our Constitution. If you look at, I think it was the judiciary branch. I can't remember off the top of my head, but one of the branches of the government literally has like just a tiny little section about how it functions, and then we kind of just figured it out from there. So just the fact that it's not written, it kind of goes with what you were saying. It doesn't have to be the only reason. It's implied powers is a very big part of the American Constitution, which doesn't necessarily mean that we have to write everything down. It's mostly the interpretation is based on the age and the people, which is why we've literally survived with the Constitution for this long. That's why it's still a document. So I think the question that I want to pose to you guys is, do you think that the time that we are living in now, does that the interpretations that we have of the Constitution at the present moment not work for the general situation in America?
I think the biggest difference is the type of weapons. I think that's why a lot of people have issues with it, because it was even worse than like a bullet handgun, right? You know, it was very you had to do everything. It was very manual and all that stuff. Now it's like semi-automatic, a lot of different. I think that's the biggest difference, which is why there's a lot of questions on it.
I think it would be not giving the founding fathers enough credit to assume that they didn't think that technology would advance in the next however many generations of America's existence. And I think while the Constitution is always open for interpretation, and we've obviously amended it many times, so can't be perfect. But the Bill of Rights is meant to be a timeless set of rights that are given to us by God and are unalienable. So it's kind of a big deal when you take one of them and you declare it obsolete. Now you can say that one of the founding fathers, people who wrote these amendments and the Bill of Rights, made a human mistake there, but the idea is that they were encapsulating ideas that were timeless by nature.
But you could argue that with that whole thing, does that give you the right to kill people? Is that something that should be enshrined in something like the Bill of Rights?
Well, it isn't enshrined in the Bill of
I
Rights.
know. I'm
so-
just saying, like, hypothetically, if that was
Carson,
like,
what you said about it being like, human rights or unalienable rights. Now that I'm thinking about it, in the Second Amendment, it doesn't talk about specifically guns. It talks about bear arms, as in the people have the right to use some sort of force against the tyrannical government. So it doesn't necessarily. I don't think it necessarily means guns, in which we're focusing on.
I think it's how
It means-
implicitly it's interpreted.
The people are not meant to be pretty much enslaved by the government. They can
Act
use
out, yeah.
force back. If you're under
Well, it
occupation,
certainly doesn't say they have the right to use assault rifles specifically, or
Yeah, I
the
know,
right
I know.
to use tanks.
but I feel like we naturally go to whenever it says bear arms and guns.
Guns, yeah.
But there's other ways we could defend ourselves or attack people. It might not be as effective, but it's not like the same way. But it makes sense for us to choose guns as in.
Well, I mean, it's mostly
It's the most powerful.
what people point to whenever they're defending the right to bear guns.
yeah.
It's, I mean, if you think about it, you have to have somewhere in the Constitution that like it says that, and if this is the only place that it says it, of course everyone's going to look at that point as it's talking about guns.
I guess from our interpretation, we look at guns. But if we're looking at the Constitution on it being timeless and like testing the timelessness of it, we can't put guns into it because guns 1,000 years ago weren't a thing, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's just
And
generally.
in 1,000 years, they won't be a thing. We'll have many
Better
weapons,
stuff,
and we'll have the same conversation. Does that fall under the Constitution? Does that fall under the right to bear arms, and that we're able to use this technology against other people?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, especially when you had the power in your hand, like you were saying earlier. I think it would be a good idea to talk about exactly what kind of guns that this has the right to defend and how much power we should give to individuals. So, I mean, do you have something else that you want to talk about next before we move on to that conversation?
I mean, just there's also the idea of whether the amendment is talking about collective rights, like the right of the states to organize their own militias, or individual rights. So there's also been a lot of this whole issue with interpreting the Second Amendment has so much legal precedent on all sides. It's
never
just
ending.
been a
Yeah.
it will
never-ending
end.
debate. Yeah. So
So we can
move on,
go
I think.
into
Yeah.
more about how we use guns to like self-defense or individual.
let's start with the argument. Like, this is what you guys started with, and your interpretation of the amendment is that it was because of defense against a tyrannical government. So let's and we started getting into a little bit that isn't really a possibility now. So what do y'all think about that?
I don't think that's
Like,
very
I
important.
think
I knew
this is
this
the-
was going to be an issue, but this is the most important part.
Is it?
Yes.
I would disagree,
disagree.
a little bit.
Well,
I
don't
think we've
think
covered
so.
the
I mean,
background.
generally, I'm going to go against there's no tyrannical government
Yeah.
to really go against. Almost.
Okay, well, this is.
What's there
How
much
about
to
just
say on
give
that?
me a chance, and you can decide if you want
Yeah, that's
to
fine.
respond.
Yeah, you can change our
Yeah.
minds. Yeah,
Sure.
that's your job.
Okay, go.
All right, so lots of people kind of immediately start laughing and immediately dismiss the idea that we need to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government. And that really just doesn't make sense to me at all. America's only been around for some 250 years. And there are many scenarios we've seen. I can go through them now of how the government could become tyrannical.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that, like, this is the most important responsibility that we have as Americans, is to preserve the freedoms that we have for future generations.
Okay, sorry. keep
So
going.
yeah, I'll go into some examples. So Julian brought up right at the beginning the January 6th riots at the Capitol. So imagine a populist, we won't name names, takes control and undermines election integrity and gets, say, the support from military generals who, since he's the populist and so charismatic, all the military generals agree with him that there was election interference. He keeps going on about this election interference. The riot at the Capitol, the people are actually not hooligans wearing buffalo costumes. They are actually armed and they invade the Capitol, and in the military, the majority, 60% say, is on the side of this populist, and then he takes control of the government like that and slowly becomes a dictatorship.
I think you just described a coup, dude, like a civil war.
Do you not think a coup is possible?
I don't think
I
it
don't
should
think
be
so.
possible because that means that we don't believe in the Constitution and the structure of our government.
Yeah, that's talking like
Well,
The
this.
Constitution
just
is
like
just a document.
No,
Yeah,
no,
you
but
can
even
break
the
it.
structure of our government, because
Yeah.
because if we've made a country that's like all powerful, or like the most free country as we've seen it, and the most structured government, those coups are not meant to happen because the government's not going to let it happen, because there's so many things like a coup.
Yes.
It's not really.
And not to mention, we have the system in place to ensure that it isn't, fraudulent. So
Well, this happens when leaders undermine their responsibilities to the government. I would actually agree with Carson here that given that the amount of things that have happened in the recent history, I think anything is possible, especially going forward. I think the question is, though, where I disagree with you a little bit, is how do you give rights like that to people? Like, how do you decide that people are able to, like, when are they justified to fight back against the government? Who can decide that the government is evil or tyrannical?
I mean, it would just have to be the majority. The point is that they have the opportunity to do so if they feel like it. It's
Okay,
up to the
so
citizens
how would
to
you
decide.
justify January 6th then?
I mean, if it actually was an armed coup, I mean, we don't have to get into personal opinions. I personally wouldn't support them, but everyone would have to make up the decisions for themselves. And if the majority of people end up supporting the coup, then that's how it would work out. But the point is that people should have the ability to rise up against the coup, and they should also have the ability to be a part of the insurrection if they feel like their rights have been violated. And that's only one of my examples. We also there's plenty of historical examples. Nazi Germany, for one, was a democracy after World War I, and we all know how that happened. It turned into one of the worst dictatorships, and that was because of a largely populist ruler that took control, turned it into a fascist government where people no longer had individual rights, and the consequences of that were people who weren't able to defend themselves were rounded up, had their rights taken away in a flash, and sent into concentration camps.
okay,
We also have Russia under the Soviet Union. Putin's used to be a democracy. Putin's turning it into a dictatorship. We also have Chile, Venezuela, Turkey, Zimbabwe, Iran, Afghanistan. These have all been democracies eventually. So do you think they were just all incompetent in setting up their democratic governments?
worse than us, yeah.
I mean, I guess judging by the fact that they're no longer in existence.
And
but
in general, like
Or
you
no,
said
or
that the
democracies,
majority would the popular thing would happen, right? If everybody has guns, then what do you think is going to happen?
Well, yeah.
It's still going to be the same thing.
I would argue Venezuela is I guess a different situation because that was the military taking control, but especially with countries like Russia, Putin still has control of the majority of the population there. So it's not necessarily that like you said, if it's populism, a lot of people support them, and that's why they have power.
No, I'm trying to say
it's
is that
like the guns don't really make a difference.
Well,
there.
yeah, I admit there hasn't been too many examples of the people rising up and overthrowing that dictatorship once it happened. I think that's largely because they don't have as many guns as we have in the United States.
Wait, so
I
But I
don't
would
get
also
that.
disagree.
No,
I mean,
wait.
wait, the U.S.
Let me say
government
something.
giving guns to some of these countries has caused more instability in the region, though. I don't feel like that's necessarily a valid
I
argument.
guess that's true. But no, what I'm trying to say is that you said that, okay, let's say everybody has the guns there, right? And doing the sixth thing, the people who are going in have guns and the people who are trying to defend have guns. How does it resolve the situation? Doesn't it make it worse? It's harder to control the people.
Yeah,
who are
exactly.
It's
trying to-
pretty much, we're kind of
same
getting
thing,
into debate on like what is the purpose of a gun meant to be, because
Right.
I feel like what
Right.
Carson is trying to say is that people should have the right to have a gun because they should have the right to use it to attack the government or other people with, and then some other people feel like someone should have a gun because they have the right to defend themselves from
Yeah.
people who are unstable, who are trying to attack them, and then there's other people who think having no guns at all kind of diminishes the entire problem. So it's basically that kind of the core of it.
The obligation of citizens in a democracy to uphold that, and they have the right to overthrow their government if it becomes tyrannical. They need the ability to do that. If they don't have guns, then that allows a small minority to subjugate them, because there's nothing you can do against an armed force when you have
So it's to kind of defend yourself from an armed force. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. Against a tyrannical armed force.
That also allows a minority to control other
the thing
people.
about the January...
The minority can't control other people when everyone has guns included. That
Well, yeah,
is
okay,
impossible now.
But the thing about, what was it, January 6th, January 20th?
I don't know.
January 6th?
Six.
So January 6th was people with guns who are going raiding the Capitol. So they're almost using
I was gonna say
they're using this weapon to kind of use it as an attack force. So it's not really, they're not using it.
And they
in
have
that
the
sense.
right to do that.
Why should
But
they?
the
you
thing
have
is,
the right
it
to
doesn't make
invade the
sense then,
Capitol,
because
though.
you just said they're defending, they're using guns to defend themselves from a tyrannical government. That makes sense. But then
in their eyes, they believed. I mean, this wasn't an armed coup. Nobody had weapons at this. It was just a silly.
People had guns on site. They just didn't use them. Sure,
I mean,
but like
think of
a
this
lot of
in-
people had
very,
guns.
very few amount of. Maybe
But
they
it
were,
doesn't
like,
matter.
branching.
One person has a gun. That entire thing is a worldwide news thing.
Yeah,
If one person has an atomic
but it's not an
rifle-
armed coup. They weren't like pre-planning
Well, but-
to take over the government. They were just like running into
Yeah,
offices
but the
and
thing
like
is-
taking
It's
Instagram
still-
pictures.
But the
and
reason
stuff.
some
why-
armed people that wait, hold on. Maybe we should do one at a time.
It's very
It's
different
kinda hard to
from
hear.
an armed coup. What happened on January 6th?
Yeah, but we're talking about legally. How do you defend that? How do you justify?
Yeah, if they
this
did
system?
have the guns, what are you gonna
Exactly.
do? We were able to
They
control
have the
that's
right
our
to have
point.
the gun. So
No, I'm saying,
Okay,
sure, they
so-
have the rights, but let's say everybody had it. How are we going to control them?
Exactly.
We were able
Yeah,
to control it
because the
since they
majority, they don't have the support of the majority of the population, so we just send the military in and take care of them, versus if it was half the country that had decided, yes, I actually believe that the election interference happened, and they threw their unwavering support behind Trump, then we would be in a civil war. And in the minds of the people that attacked the Capitol, they really believed that there was election interference. And if they believe that, then, I mean, it is their responsibility to overthrow the government.
Quick interjection here to save face. Let me clarify. A violent insurrection could only be justified and would only practically gain widespread support if all other non-violent options had been exhausted and if the grievances against the government were numerous and severe enough. The isolated and largely unsubstantiated instances of election interference in 2020 obviously did not fit this criteria. And in those cases, it is absolutely best to leave it to the legal system we have in place to scrutinize the evidence instead of resorting to violence. When I mention election interference in this hypothetical scenario, I am talking about corruption of the type that abolishes our democracy as a whole and could not be addressed without the last resort of starting an all-out civil war.
I just don't understand
It's
how
just-
guns help here.
Well,
How are you
saying
going to overthrow a
gain power?
government?
wait, actually, I have one more
people-
thing to say. Who's to say the only way you can overthrow a government
Yeah.
is through
Guns.
violence?
I don't
There's
understand
other
that.
ways, because we have the rights. We have the constitutional rights to protest, to vote. That's the correct way to
If there's
overthrow
half
a
of
government.
America going to the government and trying to overthrow them, you don't need guns for that.
So you think Jews in Nazi Germany could have just protested in the streets?
Well, yeah, but
for-
the thing is that they didn't have the United States of America to defend them or whatever.
It's not
How do we know,
Germany's
though?
Germany's
what
not United States.
if
of
the
America.
United States becomes tyrannical? Who was going to defend us then? You can't rely on a foreign nation
Yeah,
to
that's
come in and
that's
save you
whenever
from
we
your own
have
government.
the gun, but we use it to defend ourselves.
Can I just say, I think the fact that we're empowering people with the right to start a civil war if they don't agree with things is kind of scary.
That's what I'm
honestly.
saying.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, like,
That's the opposite
legally,
of scary. I think it's scary that people have no ability to defend themselves against a power that is subjugating them.
yeah, but when you legally justify it, it allows a minority to use that power. It's like when you said people have responsibility to, like, do violence if they don't agree with something. I mean, no one's ever going to agree on one thing. You're always going to have that one minority that feels responsible or the responsibility to commit violence. And we saw that happen on this instance. I'm not saying it's the only instance. There's been a lot. If you look at rioting, I mean, especially after like the George Floyd murder, and stuff like that, there was a lot of violence that occurred because people felt that rights were being violated. And can you justify that kind of destruction of property, that kind of violence? Do you think?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Well, I'm just
Okay,
saying
so
it's
you
not
think
even just
the
look,
government
it's
will
not.
always be perfect, and
No, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying is
well, what's the alternative? What are you saying?
there's no solution here really, which is why I don't really understand why we're talking about this. Like, how are we going to get to a solution if?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
it's kind of like a
basically
catch-22.
we're kind of using this to get to the core of like why are we using
Yeah,
guns or something
and
like
this
that.
is turning into
Why
the
we
entire
have the right
conversation.
to
I
bear
feel
arms.
maybe we should move on.
This is why I said let's not do it.
It is the whole conversation.
It's a good conversation to have.
I don't
I
think
mean,
so.
it
I
is,
think it's a
but-
separate
Encapsulation.
conversation
No,
to have.
I think it's related, but definitely not at the extent we've been having it. Like, I felt like this is kind of
It's a little long.
Yeah, like I mean, there's no solution here. I think that's like
What are we trying to say here?
Honestly, okay, this discussion is 100 times more important than whether we should have red flag laws and ban assault rifles. So y'all are saying there's nothing we can do because you don't want citizens to be empowered to start a civil war. if
That's
they
not
want to.
empowering them. I think that's the wrong idea.
the legal
honestly.
justification. It is empowering them to do so. Really, okay.
No, I
there
forgot
are
what I
two
was
extremes
gonna
here.
say.
Either everyone has a gun, and people can commit violence whenever they feel responsible because they feel like their rights are being violated, which is a very subjective thing. And legal justification with anything to do with violence has always had negative consequences. Or you can have no guns and you can expect foreign cooperation and peaceful resolution to work things out. But look at the UN and how dysfunctional it is. So that doesn't work either. So where are we left with? We're left with two really bad extremes, in my opinion. And there's not really necessarily a way you can compromise past the extent where, I mean, not everyone has a gun in the United States, right? But people
So
have
do
the
you
ability
think,
to, which is the middle ground here is people having guns in the US. And that's allowed. In a lot of countries, people are still allowed to have guns, even if they don't have it like to the extent of the US.
Yeah, but so do you think the United States, the colony back in those times, had the right to start an insurrection against their subjugating power, which was Great Britain?
But the thing is, they didn't have
That is
to.
a very different time period, and that is another.
Well,
that's
well,
a
well,
can
exact
of
same-
No,
worms.
no, no. But
Circumstance.
the thing is, there's a lot of layers to this because
Yeah.
back then they didn't have trust in their central power.
Do we have trust in our central power
We
now?
should.
We should.
We should
In
because
this
we're a
modern
much
era.
mature country now that we have
We're
regulations.
more
and
mature
laws.
than the Empire of Great Britain.
I would think so. Yeah,
250 years. I
we're
mean,
more
we can-
mature right now. I'd hope so.
Yeah, I think
You
so.
think we're?
I mean,
Great
the
Britain
Empire
probably
been
did way
collapsed.
worse
do you
things than we did.
Do you mean mature by
Mature as
years?
in
or,
we're more organized. We do things like we don't do things like on a
We're also
on
not
a-
an
on a
imperialist
whim
power,
or whatever.
So, well,
Great,
on
Great Britain,
I guess depending on your
well, we can go.
definition of that.
This is another conversation, but Great Britain used violence pretty much to take over the entire world. Like they didn't care about other people's rights or anything. Human rights were not a thing back then.
Do those people have the right to defend themselves against the invading power that's coming?
We have the United States government to
I guess
defend
that's-
us.
you're saying it's their government's
The
responsibility.
government.
Their
if-
government's
It's another.
responsibility.
We're pretty much going to get into another conversation of now it's whether we trust our government to protect us from other people and we trust the government to not go against us. Because if we're thinking about using guns to start a civil war, then that's not really a gun problem. That's a problem that we have against the government. The
Yeah, I
structure of
agree.
the
That's another
government.
conversation, honestly, that we're leading into.
That like we should not ever get to a point. If we ever get to a point where we need to use guns or any other type of violence to go against the government, like January 6th or whatever, then we have to question the government and the structure of the government rather than how we kind of
Yeah.
react to it. So it's an entire different conversation.
And I think you're arguing as if we want to take away guns entirely. Now, can we get a raise of hands, even though it's a podcast, of who wants to take away guns entirely? Okay, so why are we
Well,
arguing
different
about
opinion.
as in no one having guns in the country?
No, it's about the use
Because-
of guns. Because
Yeah,
I feel like we have a
exactly.
difference on use of guns. Of
Yeah,
like,
it is important. I mean, I guess you are saying that the only reason to have guns is for self-defense, and you should not have them to defend against a tyrannical government.
I'm saying, look, that's you're talking about literally a very extreme situation, and none of us are arguing for the complete removal of guns. And you're also like talking as if you're going to mandate guns to everyone because it's a responsibility to defend against the government, right? But we don't really do that. And we're not a united militia Like, the population of the United States is not a united militia just banded together under the belief that we're going to fight the government. That's just not how the country works.
That's
a very
I'm not gonna lie,
diverse population.
Very small population, because most of us don't have the courage or the actual will to take a gun and go somewhere with it with the intention of using it. That's a very
You have to
morally
think-
big thing.
I think you'll. All right, nothing good lasts forever. We have to. Thinking from all the historical examples, I have some other modern day examples, but I won't get into those.
But you think it's going to happen again? Like, it's bound to happen that there's going to be a tyrannical government?
It's inevitable, and even. All right, you want me to read you a quote?
Sure.
A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations has been 200 years. The nations have progressed from the sequence from bondage to spiritual faith, to courage, to liberty, to abundance. This is the important part. From abundance to selfishness and greed and apathy, and then dependence on the government, and then back into bondage as they vote themselves more power to the government.
Who said that?
Alexander Fraser Tytler, all the way back in the 18th century.
And it happened multiple times since he said that, so I think that
Exactly.
point.
I think
it's a
it
good
is
track record,
unbelievably naive and dangerous to assume that we are never going to have an issue where we don't need to protect our rights. Like, the United States is a miracle. What happened with establishing a democracy,
outlier, yeah.
guaranteeing equal rights, almost always the vacuum of power is immediately filled with a dictatorship. In this situation, finally, throughout the whole course of human history, it was decided, and we had a strong structure that has been stood the test of time, and we are sitting here with our individual rights, and we've been able to promulgate those and give those same opportunities to people around the globe. And we cannot just give that up and assume that everything's going to be hunky-dory from now on and just completely trust the government and give us absolutely no recourse against any sort of situation where a power that it has access to these types of firearms and weapons to which there's no recourse against unless you have them yourself. Like,
I think
That's
I mean
true.
I think I kind of I think we kind of agree that, you know, it might be bound to happen that, you know, the government takes too much control or too much power, but that's kind of like a different type of mindset of Carson, let me ask you a question. What's another way that we could exercise our rights to go against the government other than the right to bear arms?
anything else is irrelevant.
What?
Yeah, like, why do you think Donald Trump, if he took over the government, say, had control of the military, why would he give a crap about you standing outside with a sign?
I mean,
What is the president going to be doing when he does
but
that?
the thing is,
The president is Donald Trump. For all
Not
until
president, he would be a
eternity.
dictator then. He would be a dictator then. He's
Calls himself
but
the
the thing
president.
is,
He has elections that happen every 4 years still.
Look
but
at
he
Putin.
always
Oh,
wins.
Putin is the exact same thing. You know, there's actually elections for Putin coming up, and it's guaranteed he was going to win the next election.
yeah. No, but the thing is, we're then gonna have to question how he got to that power, and
Well, yeah. I mean, look, that's another topic. I want to actually pose another question. Do you think another world war is going to happen before a tyrannical government pops up in the U.S.? Because I personally feel like there's going to be a massive global catastrophe that occurs before the U.S. gets a super populous leader, like what you're saying.
well,
Like, I feel like there's a
what
bigger
does that have
issue
to do
there.
with anything?
I feel like the whole thing where it's inevitable and it's going to happen. I mean, we don't know when it's going to happen, and we can't base the decisions of today with the problems of today based on the mentality that we're going to have a dictator in 200 years.
Why not? We're screwed if we get it wrong.
Well, yeah, but we're screwed sooner if something else goes wrong.
That's a
I don't
great
understand
idea.
how owning guns changes anything for related to a global conflict.
I think that I'm saying the mentality that something bad is going to happen very soon. I mean, no one's, like I said, no one's
Not very
arguing about
soon.
taking
Even
guns.
if it happens in 1,000 years, once our guns are taken away, there's not really any going back.
We're going to have something bigger than guns in 1,000 years. And the government already has like nuclear weapons anyway. So it's not like
Yeah,
a
that's what
little
it's
squad
gonna
of
do.
people going.
All right, this is good.
you know.
I wanted to get into this.
Even though,
All
my
right,
God.
Why would civilians beat the military? Obviously, we don't have.
Oh, yeah, that was a good segue. That was a good segue. I like that. Okay.
We don't have fighter jets. We don't have nukes. We don't have what else? A bunch of like the M16s.
So
even.
what's
so,
the point of having a small little
Yeah.
handgun, huh?
So none of y'all. What do y'all think
What's it gonna
about
do?
the situation? There's no way that the civilians could beat the.
Wait, are we doing hypotheticals here?
Yes.
Okay, hypothetical. Let's say dictator Donald Trump,
Yes.
old Donnie,
Mhm.
in the White House for the last 50 years, and the people are finally
Still
getting
alive?
fed up with it. Well, imagine he gets like a eternal,
Okay, okay,
age
okay. I
preserver
understand,
or whatever,
understand.
right? So then, how would you organize a militia of the United States with our firearms and assault rifles, assuming we had them, against the government?
You can't. You're gonna get fucked. Oh,
Okay.
oops.
So first of all, the population of
Explicit
active
tag.
military right
Let's
now
go.
is 1.4 million versus 330 million is the population. That's 300 times odds outnumbering
300
them.
guns. Versus...
I mean, that's assuming that the military would entirely go with the president, though.
okay. We're just
Exactly.
it's,
Exactly. So that gives even more odds because probably about half of the military is going
wait, are
to
you going-
defect.
Are you going with the
I'm-
civilians might win this?
Yes, obviously.
Really?
I mean,
That's crazy.
somebody has to provide the
That's
counterexample
actually.
here.
I would not expect that.
I would
Okay.
agree in the fact that other foreign countries, if there was a dictator, would
Also,
hopefully provide support for that.
They're not
Yeah,
going to
that's
nuke
probably
us
true.
because who would nuke their own infrastructure unless there was like one
Bro,
base?
you obviously have not seen Russia. Like,
Okay, but unless there was one like base of rebel operations, like they're not gonna.
you haven't seen Israel then. Like,
Well, that's not their. They're not nuking anybody.
Are they not? Are they
Bro,
not
what?
literally nuking Palestinians?
Not nuking. but-
Nobody has
Bombing?
used a nuke since on.
Well, okay,
civilians
not
since
nuking,
Hiroshima.
but-
and
Oh, I don't know what a nuke is then.
a nuke. Okay.
a nuclear weapon. Okay, I meant
Missiles?
as in the
Missiles,
metaphor.
nuclear
Okay,
weapons?
you're thinking of just regular bombs, which
Okay, let's say
They're
ordnance.
still pretty destructive. I would say.
Yeah.
except nuclear weapons are like hundreds of times thousand. Or
Yeah, that makes
More.
sense. Makes sense. Yeah.
okay, but that's.
Oh, are we talking about nuclear weapons now?
That was a different day. I'll continue with more reasons. So the also urban warfare and asymmetric warfare, as we've seen with the U.S. entering Iraq and how long that war took, and also Vietnam.
And Ukraine now, also.
Yes, also Ukraine, also Israel invading Gaza right now. That's urban warfare. Even though Israel has such a extreme military advantage, it's still.
I mean, that's just so one-sided towards Israel.
Extremely-
That's like not even. That's
But
that's
still,
not higher.
you can't just invade. Think about invading a giant city, especially like you. How are you going to use tanks? How are you going to use your fighter jets in a city full of skyscrapers? It doesn't have to be skyscrapers, but tall buildings where people have snipers in every window. You have no choice but to just go in and face everything close quarters, which is very bad news for you if you're outnumbered 300-1, because all your technological advancements, almost all of them, are rendered obsolete. Also, will probably the insurrection would seize military equipment, and also that could include nukes. They're spread out all around the U.S. So depending on how fast they would act, they could very easily seize military bases right away, and then they would have access to that same equipment. That's the basics of
wouldn't
it.
be able
This is
to
a fun
maintain or
war game
use
scenario, but I
equipment,
mean, just the
but-
odds themselves of the amount that the civilians outnumber the military.
So you're saying there's power to numbers. Pretty
Yeah.
much.
And it almost doesn't matter at all what type of technology you have available to you if the odds are 300-1. Now, that's assuming it's probably going to be a 50-50 split in the populace too. But
Yeah,
then
I
you
mean-
have to consider the urban warfare and counterinsurgency.
I think we should also assume that the U.S. is a failed state at this point. So does it really what's the underlying goal here? To take out one person from power and then we have a country split into probably 5 countries afterwards?
We could always unify under one thing. But, the main point here is it is possible for the civilians to beat the military.
Oh, yeah,
okay,
for sure.
It's not even, it's more than possible. It's probable.
Is there examples in history where this has happened? Where the government has access to nuclear weapons and the other party has handguns and rifles and, and they've been able to defend themselves or take over?
I would also argue that, depending on the differences in manpower advantage with the U.S., but smaller countries have had their land occupied and the people still have not been able to successfully resist. There have been successful resistance movements, but that is, if you think about it, I think it's more, it's different now, but especially if you look at countries in like World War II, for instance, those resistance efforts were not like, France under Germany, that wasn't really.
I wouldn't call that asymmetric warfare though. That's and the odds, the population on each side was pretty even. So those are like 2 professional armies going. No,
occupied France
and insurgency rooted in a bunch of major cities and all throughout the U.S. being uprooted.
That's what it was in France though, and they still didn't manage to get their freedom.
Well, yeah, it would definitely be a very long, drawn out conflict like these insurgencies are.
Going back to what I said, is there an example? Because I'm generally interested. Because we can see success in past events. Is there an example of where civilians with handguns have
managed to successfully destroy a government?
I can't think of any. So I'll give you that. There is not any example of a giant country overthrowing their government. We might see that in Russia or China soon.
But the thing is, we can also.
We'll
it
see
doesn't
if that
have to
happens.
be.
Maybe not Russia, but
Carson,
China,
the thing that we're discussing right now, it's not really like a country going against its people. It's about a big nuclear government going against a group of people.
They would nuke all of the East Coast if they wanted to root out an insurgency?
If Donald Trump became unstable and he wanted to do that because there's a majority party in there who wanted
California,
them, you never know. You can't trust the dictator. Do you think Hitler wouldn't have done that? Hitler would, if he had a nuclear whatever, like an atomic bomb by his side. You don't think he would go to Poland and nuke that entire country? He probably would. You can't trust these dictators. You can't really predict what they're going to do because they could do the most insane thing. And they're a dictator. They're most likely going to do that because they don't have that correct mindset of being a.
I would say morality can't really be a consideration for someone that's overthrown the U.S. government. But I do also think this has kind of gone over time. So.
Yeah.
So we just talked about the defense against tyrannical government. I feel like we went into great depths with that, but now we're going to turn over into a slightly different topic about gun control, in which I feel like it's a bit more relatable. We're going to talk about self-defense. What's the definition of self-defense and individual rights? We're going to go into a little bit more depth into that. Mass shootings with examples and why the United States is almost terrible with this with this topic. And then we're going to go into how we can fix those problems with gun control measures. But first things first, we should go into self-defense. Do you guys have any definitions about what self-defense is? It's pretty self-explanatory.
I'm pretty sure there's a debate about the definition. Yeah. I guess if... it's not. We can start with the extremes. It's not self-defense to go murder someone. Mm-hmm. If someone runs onto your lawn and starts peeing on your lawn, it's not really self-defense.
Yeah.
So we're talking about robberies.
Or how about the use of violence in order to defend yourself or your property against clear and imminent danger?
Danger, yeah, that's a good way.
Because I mean, how it
Where'd
is.
you pull that out from?
Oh, okay. A bit of I was in a government class last semester, and we talked. It was mostly about policing. So basically, how the police view it is there's different distinct categories, and police aren't authorized to use force unless there is clear and present danger, like very obvious, right? And then if there's anything less than that, then like suspicion of danger, something like that, they're not authorized to use force.
So that's some kind of a guideline that we should use for.
Well, yeah,
ourselves?
exactly. I mean, that's a legal precedent. It's like you have to have clear danger that you can justify, especially in a legal setting. So that is how it's done. All right.
Yeah, that's fair, and I don't think there's much debate about the
No,
legal
there's not.
definition
But
right now.
there's debate on what constitutes clear and present danger, right? So the question is,
like,
it a one thing we had to talk about here is what's it called, like the appropriate response if someone, if a gun is too much of too harsh of a response against someone with brandishing a knife or something like that, because there's always
there's a lot of
appropriate
gray area.
responses.
I feel like that's appropriate. If someone pulls a knife on me, if I have a gun on myself.
No, sure, it's an example, but you know what I mean. It's
A
like
better
it depends
example.
on
A better example is like an unarmed burglar, maybe.
yeah, unarmed burglar.
Still there. I feel like it's still there, right?
Yeah, but it really
You have the right to kill
Look,
the person?
Yeah.
it depends
Well,
on the
personally, no, but like I don't think maybe I would do that. But
regardless of our personal
I feel like
opinions and how we
everybody-
feel that this can play out in a certain situation, we have to think about it in legal terms as a framework, as in like how do you give one person the right to do this in one specific case, and that becomes a precedent of how you can apply that to several subsequent cases. So this has to be like a very you know what I'm trying to say, right? A very like over encompassing argument.
one thing is, if we're going into the argument about what constitutes your right to defend yourself, as in defending yourself with a gun and killing another person or potentially killing the person, is that the thing we tend to do is after the scenario, we look at a bird's eye view of the situation and we understand it in a different light than the person who's actually getting attacked.
Right.
I have personal experience with this. I got broken into last year. Okay.
Would you have shot that person?
Well, that goes into. I don't think I'd have the courage to shoot him, but that's a different thing.
Yeah.
If I had a gun on me, the thing is, whenever that guy came into the living room and it came into our room, I was in shock. I didn't know what to think. Me and my cousin, we put our hands up. You got the wrong. He was on cocaine or whatever. He was highly intoxicated, but we didn't know if he had a knife. I didn't really have to think about it. It was like he could have had a knife. He could have a gun. And I put my hands up. I didn't think about using a weapon because I'm not fighting. I'm flighting. I'm flighting as in I'm defending myself.
Yeah.
Right.
As in I'm covering
not
myself.
really.
It's a flight response.
Yeah, you'd rather run
Yeah,
away.
it is.
I think
There's
that's
no
the
way for me to
opposite
run.
of
Yeah.
defending, but
Yeah. But you know what I mean.
yeah.
So if I did have a gun and I was a different person in that, like an adult who I have a wife and kids who, like I'd kill for them or something like that.
Right.
Then in that scenario, even if he didn't have a gun, if he could potentially have a knife or a gun, I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking he must have a knife or a gun, and I'm going to protect my wife and kids, and therefore I'm going to shoot him. Because he's providing a danger to me and, more importantly, my wife and my kids.
Yeah.
I mean, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, burglaries go wrong all the time. You have no
Yeah.
idea what type of weapon they're holding. I think
Yeah.
as soon as somebody enters your home uninvited, and
Shoot the
it's
person.
clear that they are not meant to be there, then they forfeited their right.
Yeah, I think that's
To
what
live.
it plays into. Yeah.
So,
Because you shouldn't be obligated to wait and see what his intentions are for you,
Right,
because
yeah,
by
yeah.
then it could be too late.
It would be too late. Yeah.
this kind of lesson is kind of scenario to the Tom Hanks movie with the flight with the plane. Does that make sense? Because in the actual scenario, he doesn't have a clear head, and then he
I don't
has
know if I know the movie,
the
but
simulation. You guys have never watched that movie? Never
Wait.
mind. I'm stretching too much. The Tom Hanks movie, it's real. The plane that went on the New York River. It's fine. Never mind.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
It's
Yeah,
kinda that
Sully,
scenario.
right? It's called Sully.
Yeah. So
No, basically what he's talking about was there was a period they were judging it as if he had an immediate response, but in real life people have a very delayed response because they're in shock.
yeah.
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's kind of a tangential argument. So bringing it back to
Well,
like,
I mean, no, actually, I think
it's like a
I
separate
think
side
that I can see where
argument.
he's coming from is if you have a gun and something happens, you're in shock, you have to assume that you're not thinking clearly when something is happening. So it really depends on if someone doesn't have their full concentration whenever they have a weapon, and if you're a person that's not able to use it, should you still have the...
I know, that's just an argument about like the definition of self-defense.
Yeah,
Bringing it
exactly.
back to gun control, the question is that a valid reason to own a gun? Are there other ways? Like some people say only the police should have guns. They're the ones that have been trained to use them, that we've trusted to protect us. So why don't you just call the police?
Actually,
No.
I feel like we should talk about a good topic. Let's talk about tyrannical governments. No, I'm joking.
I was getting scared there.
Flashbacks.
Okay, so are we all in agreement that
No, I think
let's make the best argument for not using a gun to defend yourself?
Yeah, I'm saying,
Well,
like, what else could you use? Like
police?
tranquilizers.
Well, no.
Are we glossing over this argument? We need to take this seriously.
Any sort of melee.
Well, okay, make the case. So,
I feel like if you had a melee weapon, it's more violent as yourself as a user. You're more
No,
likely to
melee,
get
I think we
injured.
should take a melee out of it. Like, if
No,
the
I
other
think
person-
if you don't have-
I have a statistic for that.
okay, let's.
Oh, okay,
While
bro.
you're doing that,
Look,
let's
look.
go through this one by one. So, calling the police, obviously, they take at
it
least
takes some time.
some time to get there. So
Yeah.
you're not going to be able.
Mhm.
That's just
That's the
surrendering
second
yourself
part,
to the
yeah.
person.
Let's
Okay.
take that out of the
Non-lethal methods. I feel like that's also kind of a non-starter. If
Probably not
somebody
gonna
has
work. Yeah.
your
Like a
attacker has
taser?
a gun.
You don't think it's effective?
I mean, it could work in some cases,
You
but
gotta
not
go
as
to the
effective
person, right?
as
Who
a
knows
gun.
what they have.
I think.
It's not from a
I
distance.
mean, you
Yeah.
should be able to use equal force at least to whatever they
Mhm.
have. So
Yeah. At
Yeah,
least
probably.
equal force. That makes sense.
So
Yeah.
would you? What about like?
I mean,
what other options do we have instead of
I think a
guns? Is there any
kitchen
options?
kitchen knife could be very effective, but only if the person
Has a knife.
doesn't
Is
have a
trained.
weapon.
Or
Well, yeah,
trained-
but you're also considering the fact that, I mean, someone's probably, definitely more likely to shoot someone than actually go and have a
you
knife
bring
fight with them.
them- yeah.
I mean, no, look,
Yeah,
if you
it's
take
easy
guns,
to-
Gun to a knife
I think
fight
we should
type of-
establish that
Yeah.
if you don't have a gun in the equation, then self-defense means that either you would use non-lethal like tasers or just not anything at all. But I think that if we're going to talk about lethal force as a form of self-defense, that we should talk about guns specifically, because that's what we're
Yeah.
doing.
Okay.
Okay,
but-
so basically we've established. I mean, I don't think you can make an argument that you can defend yourself without a gun, especially against attackers who have a gun.
I would.
If there's
I
an
would-
attacker that has a gun,
I would feel more safe if someone attacked me and I had a gun.
yeah.
Yeah, pretty much the entire
Okay,
story.
so does that mean there's no way we could ever ban all guns?
No, that's what I'm trying to
It's,
say is that can you use like
That's
tranquilizers?
a
or
big stretch.
Anything like that instead of guns? Is that possible?
I mean, a
Tranquilizer?
taser, but everything
Not
else
a
is
taser.
close.
Tranquilizer is like you shoot it from
Well,
a
I
distance.
don't
I mean, what kind of tranquilizer
Or
do
like
they
a
have
shock
for?
thing or whatever. that
Yeah,
shocks
something like
people.
that. Can you do that? That's what I'm
That's
asking. Is
a
that
way.
possible?
It might not be as effective. It's a way
Yeah.
though.
I'm pretty sure. I mean,
I
these
think-
all have their specifics, but like, are we assuming that the person has a gun? Because if they have a gun and you shoot them with a tranquilizer, it takes like, I'm sure, at least
It
30
takes
seconds for
a-
it to kick in.
yeah, it's
so
not
they
like
just
a
shoot
movie.
you.
It's
So
not
I
Or
like
mean,
maybe the
movies.
shock thing, like it was saying. So, do
Well,
we have
like,
options? That's
what
I'm
shock
saying.
thing?
A taser.
Like a,
Oh,
not
No,
a
no,
taser.
no,
No, the
not
police
one
stuff
that.
such a
Yeah,
guy.
the ones
Like
that shoot the
rubber
thing and
bullets.
They don't. Okay, but yeah, these are things for like riot control. If we were going to talk about specific something someone can have, let's just say a close range taser. It has to be, But if someone has a gun and you bring out something like that, let's say you bring out anything against an intruder. If anything short of a gun, it's more dangerous for you as someone
Yeah, I think
defending
that's
your
what
home.
the problem is. That's what
Yeah,
I don't know.
and especially that also applies if you have a gun and you don't
What
want to
if
use
the
it.
people don't
Yeah, that's
have
the
guns? What if all guns are banned and your attackers just don't have any access to guns? Assuming a perfect world where
Then it's the next most dangerous weapon. What's the
A
next
knife.
most? Then yeah.
so
Knife or a taser?
A knife, but
so the
um,
attacker has a knife,
you have a knife.
you have a knife.
It's worse for
Equal
both
fight.
parties. At this
Fair
point,
ground.
might as well just rely on police if there's guns banned completely.
In a perfect world,
What if
that
they
makes
come at you
sense.
with a knife? You still can't rely on police. You have to use the knife.
I thought this was a perfect world. I mean,
Well,
It's not too
I meant
literal.
in terms of like
No guns.
Nobody has a gun.
no guns.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that perfect world, the next best. I mean, a knife.
Okay, well, I should clarify. When I say perfect world, I meant reliable police services, which we don't really have right now. So
I meant, well,
And
that
that's-
would be
and
an
that
impossible world, like where they teleport to you. I meant
that's
a
not what I'm
perfect
saying. That's
world
not what I'm saying.
where,
Like, okay.
assuming we had 100% efficient, because people do make the argument that we should ban all guns.
Mhm.
So in that case, they're saying that people don't have the right to defend themselves, which I don't know that they
With a
ever
gun.
actually argue that. I think it's more the argument that then nobody would have guns, so it's okay that you don't have one. So
I think the counter for that, everybody says, is that criminals will just get it no matter what. But
yeah, so
with normal
Yeah, I
criminals,
think
we can
that's
talk about that
No,
a little
like-
later if
Okay.
that's a valid argument.
I
Yeah.
mean, okay.
I think the whole hypothetical is a little untenable, but I'm just saying, like, if you had a world where you ban guns completely, I feel like the biggest response would probably be to not directly engage a criminal. Like,
Oh, just run away.
well, I'm just
I
saying,
mean,
like,
actually,
that
yeah.
would,
In
like,
terms
unless,
of engaging someone stronger than you with a knife, then
Yeah.
it's-
Unless you had like children involved, obviously that that you were in a separate room for them and stuff like that.
So
But
you
if
really can't. I mean, sorry to cut you off. You really can't defend yourself without a gun.
Well,
even
that's
with
what
a
we're
knife,
saying. Like,
because
except for home,
imagine
you
a
know.
single mother home with her children. If a big, strong, buff guy comes at her with a knife, I mean,
No, me-
it becomes much easier
That
to.
makes sense.
You almost have no chance. But if you have a gun, guns are the great equalizer. I mean, all you do is pull a trigger.
There's a movie about that. The Equalizer. Sorry.
There you go. That would be my point. Okay, so do we feel like we've covered that?
Well, I
Self-defense?
mean, we've
Yeah, I
okay,
mean, we've established that people should have the right to self-defense with guns, basically.
we've established that
Some
the
sort
other
of
way
gun.
doesn't work. How about we establish the other alternative where relying on police? How do we feel like that? Do we think that the government or the police
I
services in the
personally,
US?
I mean, I obviously feel safe around a police officer, but if I'm in that situation, you can't rely on the police because you don't
I
know.
mean, if you live in
It's
a
an-
rural area, it could take 10 minutes.
It's
Not
out of your
even
control.
that, actually.
It's out of your control, and people who don't have things in control, they tend to worry more.
How about economically disadvantaged areas and densely populated urban areas? Actually, they have very, very slow police times. They have the majority of crime rates in those areas. So in reality, if we were to take all guns away,
Wait, they have the slowest response times, but they have the highest crime.
I'm not sure about the slowest and like compared
That
to
wouldn't make
rural.
sense. That's like kind of.
But
counterintuitive.
no, well, if you think about like certain disadvantaged areas, I mean, say in a city like New York, for instance,
Like downtown.
yeah, the police services are very well, I mean, you can make
Understaffed?
this is another
Yeah,
understaffed,
it's an under
very
topic.
understaffed. This is a polarizing argument, but you could also argue underfunded.
Uh-huh.
So it causes police services to be lower. And generally speaking, if you have a spread thin police case, it takes them. And we researched this a lot, like last semester, which is if you have a situation where it takes a long time to get there, and it's in a disadvantaged community, then it's taking away guns would potentially be more harmful to a certain population than others. If that makes
Okay,
sense.
so yeah, I'm
But
glad you
just-
reminded me.
Yeah.
Going off of the disparity in police response, a couple of years ago, you might remember there were nationwide riots because people started calling for us to defund the police.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been widespread mistrust in our police force ever since. So some of those same people that claim that might like to say, why don't you just call the police?
Mhm.
Well, I mean, if you don't trust the police, then why are you putting your own life in their hands?
Yeah, it's
But
kind of ironic how the same people who argue that also argue for not being not having guns. Or,
Yeah.
Well, that's it for part 1 of our gun control series. In part 2, released next week, we'll weigh the benefits of various gun control measures and discuss the epidemic of mass shootings in America. Remember to subscribe and follow our podcast so that you don't miss it. If you're on YouTube, you're welcome to continue the conversation in the comments section and let us know what we missed. Thanks for watching.